Since I've been here, people have told me how timely it is for me to be speaking about sexual violence with the last few weeks, and we would say the last 2 months, and the last number of hundreds of years. And my, my answer has been that I'll be happy when it's not timely to give such a paper anymore. Last June, Susanna Danuta Walters, director of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program at Northeastern and editor of the journal Signs, published an op-ed in the Washington Post entitled, "Why Can't We Hate Men?" More than 3,000 people reacted to the piece on the online version. A flurry of reactions took over the web, and even a little way up north, in Montreal, a few Francophone journalists took the article to task. According to one female columnist in Montreal and a number of men on my Facebook wall, of course, one of its critical problems had to do with what was implied by this op-ed as something of a call to arms. When they have gone low for all of human history, maybe it's time for us to go all Thelma and Louise on their collective butts, writes Walters. This reference to the now classic movie is what was deemed by some as inappropriate. How can Thelma and Louise, pulling out a gun on the men who abused and harassed them, serve as an example? How can anyone suggest violence and hatred as an adequate reaction to misogyny and sexism? The world has little place for feminist anger, wrote Walters. Women are supposed to support, not condemn, offer succor, not dismissal. We're supposed to feel more empathy for your fear of being called a harasser than we are for the women harassed. We are told he's with us and not him, hashtag not him. But truly, if he were with us, wouldn't this all have ended a long time ago? If he really were with us, wouldn't he reckon that one good way to change structural violence and inequity would be to refuse the power that comes with it? So men, if you really are with us and would like us to not hate you for all the millennia of woe you have produced and benefited from, start with this. Lean out so we can actually just stand up without being beaten down. Pledge to vote for feminist women only. Don't run for office. Don't be in charge of anything. Step away from the power. We got this. And please know that your crocodile tears won't be wiped away by us anymore. We have every right to hate you. You have done us wrong. Hashtag because patriarchy. It is long past time to play hard for team feminism and win. Isn't that lovely? I wish I had written that, but this is Walters, of course, who wrote that. The suggestion that men lean out for women to be able to lean in was obviously also perceived by a number of readers as unacceptable. How dare she? Isn't that a reversal of sexism? But more importantly, it was Walters' blunt statement about women having every justification to hate men, given proof of everything that has been done to them throughout history and still today. While of course we're told not to hate men because, as the hashtag reads, not all men. I began writing this paper while watching, one more time, the series Big Little Lies, wanting to think through the connections between today's theme, secrets, and the lies that make this TV series. I wanted to think about the secrets that women, like the series' main characters, carry with them, secrets that have to do with men and sexual violence. Throughout Big Little Lies, aired by HBO a few months before MeToo, the show's main female characters reveal secrets. The most important one being how Celeste and Jane have been abused, and as we find out in the final episode, sorry for the spoiler, by the same man, Perry, Celeste's husband, whom Jane has never met prior to the last scene, and who she recognizes as the man who raped her. A rapist and wife-beater who has fathered 3 boys, one of which, Jane's son, Ziggy, who is wrongly accused of being a bully at school, and another, one of Celeste's twins, Max, who is the actual bully, as we find out. So Perry, who lives inconspicuously in the community. a man who himself is a lie. Perry, the male character, may not be all men within the TV series. Other male characters, albeit at times unclear about their actions or intentions, are nowhere near as violent as him. But what interests me is how, while being a single character, a hero in the TV series, he is also all men. In the final scene of the series, all the characters are brought together at a fundraising event for the school. The women are dressed as Audrey Hepburn, and the men as Elvis Presley. This in itself would deserve analysis. On the way there, Perry figured out that Celeste is finally determined to leave him. He menaces her, but she manages to get out of the car and run to the party. He follows her as if everything was okay. At some point during the evening, Celeste leaves the party, and we see her on the back terrace with the other female characters, Madeline, Jane, and Renata. All the main female characters except one, the only black woman, Bonnie. Perry walks towards them, pleading Celeste to come and speak to him, to come to the car with him, and as Celeste replies with a forceful no, Jane suddenly recognizes him as the man who raped her. In a very delicate exchange of gazes, Jane, horrified, looks at Madeline, who understands what Jane is saying with her eyes. Madeline, in turn, looks at Celeste, who looks at Jane, and as Perry seems to understand what is happening during this exchange, he takes 2 steps towards Celeste and grabs her, starts hitting her again as the women pointlessly try to stop him. Until Bonnie, who suspected something when she saw Perry walk out of the party and followed him, runs screaming towards him. She rams into Perry, who falls down the set of stairs at the edge of the terrace being renovated and gets impaled on a metal stack. Bonnie didn't intend to kill him, but she did want to stop him from beating Celeste further. The whole series is built around the suspense of who killed Perry. The women all tell the same story. As Perry was going to kick Celeste again, he tripped and fell. The detective is convinced that they are all lying. But why? Everything points to Celeste using self-defense against an abusive husband, something that would not get her a real prison sentence. So why lie? Why keep what happened that night a secret? What we are brought to understand from this collusion between the women before, during, and after Perry's death is that in the end, not one woman is responsible for Perry's death. They are devastated, standing together at the funeral, devastated not by the man's death, but by what was done to them, what they all had to suffer. Just as he is all men, the embodiment of male domination, they are all women together, protecting and defending one another. I'll just take a sip of water. March 2018. I hand in a manuscript to my editor, a book that I've been working on for the last 2 years, begun just before the movement Raped Never Reported, and finished a few months after MeToo. It's a novel that weaves together pieces of my life and the movie Thelma and Louise. I follow the movie, transcribe its scenes, the dialogues, reflect on what I see on the screen, read and write about how it was made. Think back to the year 1991, the year of Anita Hill, as we very well now recall, when I was a 22-year-old young woman, just back from the classic backpacking trip through Europe, sitting in a movie theater and crying hopelessly at the end of Thelma and Louise. Writing this book that is neither really a novel, an essay, or a memoir, but at once all of these things, I sit between Thelma and Louise at the front of the car and revisit my life using the movie's most significant markers: 2 women, a road trip, a rape, and a gun. I began writing this book knowing that it would be about sexual violence, about what we like to call the gray zone of sexual violence. When one is abused in the privacy of the home by someone they know, in a way that doesn't, on the surface, seem violent. A violence that presents itself in such a way that one assumes that it is not rape, because it's really the consequence of the victim being an improper lover. These demands are portrayed as being acceptable and that the victims must abide, even though every part of them screams otherwise. If they don't abide, they will be shamed, humiliated, menaced, ignored, the object of cruelty and perversity. No knife at their throat, no gun to their head, no lock on the door. The prison is now inside them, its bars put up by the abuser. This prison, is what my book is about. But the road I follow to tackle this is convoluted. I needed a pretext, the movie, in order to write. But mostly I needed to be accompanied. I needed to not be alone. I needed to be with Thelma and Louise. I needed to be with Thelma, whose rape is put into question. Was she really raped? Was it a complete rape? He was raping me, she says. Does that count as rape? And she was seen dancing with him all night, drinking and spinning around. Did she ask for it? I needed to be with Louise, who went through something years before in Texas, something we guessed to be a rape, something that got her to learn how to shoot a gun, something that she refuses, however, to talk about. I'm warning you, just drop it. I'm not going to talk about that. You understand? I'm not talking about it. You understand? It's okay, says Thelma. It's okay. The film ends with us guessing that she was raped, but knowing nothing about it. What, where, when, by whom? Louise leaves Thelma and us hanging. Only Slocum, the detective, seems to have this information. I know what happened to you in Texas, he says to Louise on the phone. And Louise's eyes become a blank. For a few minutes on screen, as she follows Thelma back to the car, she seems to be sleepwalking. October 2017. I had been writing my book for a year and a half. While driving to another city with my editor to attend an event, she asked me if I was willing to speak to her about what I was currently working on. I described the project. I explained the connection between the movie and myself as the book's first-person narrator. I told her that it was about sexual violence, but I didn't say more than that. All of a sudden, I became speechless. A little while later, after we had been on the road chatting about our mutual lives, her hands on the wheel, without turning to look at me, she said gently, "You are secretive." She said it like a truth, something that defined me. But it also sounded like an invitation to break the seal of secrecy and reveal something more about me, that thing that I had been hiding. The scene itself, what he did to me, when and how often, under what pretext, using what words, how he moved, how he maneuvered, and how I reacted, how I survived. Writing with Thelma and Louise, I tried to write about him. I tried to hold words between him and me. I tried to point words at him without pulling the trigger, only holding them as if to say, I know what you did, and I see you. But I couldn't bring myself to bring him into literature. I could only write around him, refer vaguely to how and where and when. I couldn't bring myself to describe what he did specifically, to me. Literature wasn't justice, justice as it plays out in the world. Literature was literature, and as such, Thelma and Louise had to be enough. I understood why Louise refused to speak, why she wouldn't put herself in that kind of danger, why she refused to tell the story, why she kept the secret. She held a gun to the man who was raping her friend, and she pulled the trigger when he added insult to injury and humiliated them, canceled them out, rendered their pain invisible. I should have gone ahead and fucked her, Harlan says. No remorse, no fear, no shame. But we live with the shame. The shame of having gone through abuse and the shame that comes with the act of telling, having to tell, needing to tell, wanting and not wanting to tell the story. I spend my life writing about myself, doing my autopsy through autobiographical writing. But always there is a secret, this secret, the story hidden behind a closed door. Who would we be asked Rebecca Solnit in October 2017 in the midst of MeToo. Who would we be if our epics and myths, our directors and media moguls, our presidents, congressmen, chief executive officers, billionaires, were not so often white and male? For the men now being exposed controlled the stories, often literally as radio executives, film directors, heads of university departments. These stories are the doors we walk through or the doors that slam in our faces. MeToo opened the doors or broke them down. And now I can see, everywhere in the room, the stories of every woman I know. I don't know every detail of their stories, but I know that we all share an experience of sexual violence. Sexual harassment, that goes without saying, but actual sexual violence, from bad to worse to even worse sex. What is commonly referred to as the gray zone of sex, or as someone has sung, blurred lines, meaning those moments that are considered impossible to judge because it could go on one side or the other. One will call it violent, while the other will call it rough. One will deem it as having been non-consensual, while the other will promise that it actually was. One will call it rape, while the other will just call it sex. It is the gray zone described by a woman called Grace in her interview for Babe about an evening spent with Aziz Ansari, when he asked and asked again, insisting, pulling her hand, pushing her head, until after saying no a number of times, she gave in and complied before finally walking out. Not walking out before because he was a man of power. Not walking out before out of fear of what could happen to her. The gray zone that is portrayed throughout the series Big Little Lies when Celeste and Perry are having sex, a form of sex so intertwined with marital violence that it is impossible to think of it as consensual. A form of sex that lets one think that if Celeste complies, it is because she fears that were she to say no, Perry would keep on going anyway. And then what? What is worse, being violently raped or grasping at straws of desire, trying to make oneself believe that you too want this? Celeste's case is not unique, nor is Grace's. And what they force us to think about is why men insist, why they keep going. There is no gray zone, per se. What there is, though, is fear. Women's fear that saying no will precipitate more violence. When asked by Professor Sarah McClelland of the University of Michigan what, in their view, qualifies as bad sex, a group of young people, heterosexual men and women, offered very different answers. For men, bad sex is when their partner is passive, not very exciting, and when they, the men, don't reach orgasm. For women, bad sex has to do with the possibility of discomfort, of physical pain, and of negative emotions, with the risk of sexual violence. Women say no often, and they are often not listened to. But they also don't say anything, because saying something may end up causing more damage either during or after an episode of sexual violence. So, the question is not, should women speak? Should we tell our secrets? But rather, can we be heard? More so, why should we need to speak? How is it that men don't always already know what they should not be doing? Why is it that they are very aware that they are not allowed to pry open the door of a car that is not theirs, that they are not allowed to steal it, that it is vandalism to scrape it by running a key against it, but they don't know when to stop what they are doing with a woman? When will men understand that they have to stop? When will they be sensitive to what women are expressing with words or without? When will a woman who is unconscious or who becomes catatonic during an episode of sex be the clear sign that the encounter has to stop and that he has to leave her alone? Will her words, her tears, her screams ever be enough? And even more, why does she need to speak, cry, scream? Why does it need to be made explicit? Why is he not capable of understanding the signs that she gives with or without words? There may be a problem with reading, with men reading women. We've been saying it for years, claiming the need for parity, not only in the realm of politics, but in the more general realm of culture. But the MeToo movement, because it arose from Hollywood, brought it even more to light. Harvey Weinstein's alleged sexual violence off-screen against more than 50 women goes hand in hand with the way women are treated on-screen. Actresses chosen for their youth, their looks, and because they are considered sexy, available, and game. Actresses offered stereotypical roles that lack depth or which once again will show them being violated, raped, abused, murdered. Hollywood does what Hollywood sells. Therefore, the reaction is not only to come together against one common abuser, but to try to change the culture. And to change the culture not only means attacking sexual harassment and sexual abuse as what one man does to one woman, but as what is done in general to women by all men, on and off the screen, how they are rendered quiet and invisible in constant fear of being disappeared. This is what makes Lily Louveborough's concept of the male glance not only appealing, but important. Published in the New York Magazine in spring 2018, Louveborough suggests that while we have been taught to see detail in a woman's face, her wrinkles, for instance, how she ages, we are still unable to see complexity in a woman's story. It's a question of reading habits, of lazy reading habits, when it comes to women. Not even a reading, but a looking, a glancing. The male glance, she writes, is the opposite of the male gaze, Laura Mulvey's concept. Rather than linger lovingly on the parts it wants most to penetrate, it looks, assumes, and moves on. It is, above else, quick. The glance is social and ethical the way advice columns are social and ethical. A communal pulse declaring briefly, definitively, and with minimal information which narrative textures constitute turgid substance, which diastolic fluff. This is the male glance's sub rosa work, and it feeds an inchoate, almost erotic hunger to know without attending, to reject without taking the trouble of analytical labor, because our intuition is so searingly accurate, it doesn't require it. So this is how Louveborough writes about the male glance. So the lack of labor, the absence of effort, this is what I want to refer to. The laziness that comes with a man not reading his female partner, not only, but also because our whole culture aligns itself with this laziness. Not reading women accurately because women are not being read specifically with the delicate attention and true effort that it entails. Female storytellers are not seen as masterful or intentional. Women lack universality. They are not the public, writes Louveborough. A girl's story is automatically seen as a chick thing. And when she succeeds, it has to do with some kind of accident. Louveborough writes, we fail to see beyond the limits of our own generic expectations. Faces and stories belong to different domains of experience, but they have one thing in common. We're trained from an early age to consume them differently depending on the gender of their origin. We are blind to female intentionality. Yes, a number of films and TV shows, such as Big Little Lies, have provided us with nourishing fiction and complex female protagonists, past the non-wrinkled stage of life, evolving in corrugated narratives that don't all end well. But we still need to unlearn the male glance, which means both being less receptive to the slightest sign of male genius and assuming that there's likely quite a bit more to the female text than we initially see. As Catherine McKinnon wrote in February 2018, the mass mobilization against sexual abuse through an unprecedented wave of speaking out in conventional and social media is eroding the two biggest barriers to ending sexual harassment in law and in life, the disbelief and trivializing dehumanization of its victims. It's hard not to think about the last 2 weeks when reading these sentences. Furthermore, this movement could, actually it must have an impact on the law, on how cases of sexual harassment and abuse are treated, statute of limitations, who can be sued, settlements, etc. As McKinnon suggests, institutional or statutory changes could include prohibitions or limits on various forms of secrecy and non-transparency that hide the extent of sexual abuse and enforce survivor isolation, such as forced arbitration, silencing non-disclosure agreements, even in cases of physical attacks and multiple perpetration, and confidential settlements. These are all questions that are very sensitive on university campuses, for instance. What do we reveal? What do we hide after a perpetrator has been found guilty, for instance? MeToo, in whatever shape or form, in the end broke the silence, ruptured the seal of secrecy on a general state of sexual violence. It is MeToo, concludes McKinnon, this uprising of the formerly disregarded that has made untenable the assumption that the one who reports sexual abuse is a lying slut, and that is changing everything already. Sexual harassment law prepared the ground, but it is today's movement that is shifting gender hierarchies, tectonic plates. We'll see how far we go, but it's definitely something that I want to imagine as possible. All this entails listening to women, having women count, not having to count how many women there are in a boardroom, on a reading list, in a seasoned theater program, in a newsroom, or as part of faculty, because women actually count. One woman, any woman, counts. What happened a year ago is what has been happening regularly, and that McKinnon reminds us of, referring to campus rape and harassment. It typically took 3 to 4 women testifying that they had been violated by the same man in the same way to even begin to make a dent in his denial. That made a woman, for credibility purposes, 1/4 of a person. One thinks of the now close to 100 women accusing Harvey Weinstein, of the 60 women who have come forward about Bill Cosby, who has now been found guilty of one accusation, and of numerous other cases where a serial abuser is brought to justice. The horror of it is not only how women were abused, but that there needed to be many of them to actually build a case. One woman, it seems, is rarely enough. Because as Lee Gilmore writes, to this day, we associate women to mystery, secrecy, and most importantly, to lies. When a woman speaks, we tend to not believe her. She is a tainted witness, put into question at a police station, shamed and discredited in a courthouse, as well as in the privacy of her relationships with family and friends. Are you sure? What did you do? What were you wearing? Until, in the end, someone says, nobody knows what really happened. Either as individuals or as members of the category women, a category that carries less symbolic and material capital than men as witnesses in courts of law, Gilmore points out. And usually as both, women victims of sexual abuse are disbelieved. They are never the right victim, the perfect victim, whose testimony is totally convincing and whose actions are devoid of doubt. This is how we read women, the same way we read cultural objects for or by women. We offer ready-made readings. We work hard to ignore the complexity of a situation, not only out of readerly laziness, but out of fear. For if we were to read adequately, what would that entail? What would we then be forced to face, if not our collective inability to hear and read, and hence recognize the signs of power imbalance, sexism and misogyny, injustice and pain? In fact, women's will to be witnesses, however discouraging an experience it will most probably be, carries an address that comes with a demand to be read. Something else I find in Thelma and Louise. Are you all okay? Are you bearing with me? Yeah? In the parking lot scene, when Harlan is raping Thelma, Louise pulls out a gun and points it on the side of his neck. Harlan lets go of Thelma, saying, "All right, hey, just calm down. We were just having a little fun, that's all." "Looks like you've got a real fucked up idea of fun," replies Louise. She then backs up, the gun still pointed at him, and commands, "Turn around." In the future, when a woman's crying like that, she ain't having any fun. As she turns to walk away, he screams in her back, "Bitch." Thelma and Louise keep walking. Louise stops when she hears Harlan say, like an addendum to his insult, "I should have gone ahead and fucked her." What did you say?" she asks, walking towards him again. And he insults her. He answers, "I said, suck my cock." This is when Louise raises her arm and pulls the trigger. This is when she acts, because he has insisted one more time, because he clearly refuses the reading that she has just spelled out for him. In the future, when a woman's crying like that, she's not having any fun. But Harlan doesn't care if a woman is not having any fun. The "we" in "we were just having a little fun" is his. He is we. He embodies this "we" that Lily Louvborough describes as the "we every American, regardless of gender or class or race, is trained to identify with from the moment they start consuming media." It's a "we" that doesn't quite include the individual. In fact, it routinely invites the consumer to identify against herself. But it's a very real "we" without whom that individual would be unable to understand or navigate her culture. And so, Louvborough compares the marginalized viewer's experience of culture to the icebreaker game. When in a room, the first person says her name, the second has to say the first person's name and then her own, and so on to the last person who has to remember everybody's name. This is what it feels like to be a woman in our culture. You have to be an I inside a we. You always have to read the we in order to exist as an I. The we, on the other hand, or so it seems, can easily do without you. And so let's say it has to do with reading, with seriously including women in culture as interesting, sensitive, creative, human beings who are worth being read, and therefore maybe being able to read them in actual life. This, it seems, is the broader challenge. Furthermore, while we know that women make up the greater part of those who read in North American society, women's writing, female literature, books written by and for women still tend to be dismissed as not being real, that is, universal, that is, objective literature. The type of writing that interests everybody, not only women. The same goes for films and TV series. But what this also reveals is that if women are not read by everybody, they do, on the other hand, read one another. We, a different we, are able to read and interested in reading each other. We are compelled to identify with one another. And from this identification stems political engagement, resistance, feminism. While identification should not be necessary for there to be a common goal for which to fight, women need not be the same in order to be feminist together, nor do they have to agree on everything and share each and every goal. Identification is part of what allows women to survive. That is the meaning of MeToo. It has happened to me too. We share a common experience. I understand you. I empathize with you. I know what you have gone through. While women are often portrayed as enemies, the media revel in catfights, I would rather think of us as natural friends, linked to each other by this common trauma that is sexual violence. This is what Maria Root and Laura Brown call insidious trauma. A trauma usually associated with the social status of an individual being devalued because a characteristic intrinsic to their identity is different from what is valued by those in power. Women identified by their gender and living in a culture not only where there is a high base rate of sexual assault, but where such behavior is considered normal and erotic by men, are exposed to insidious trauma. Hence, many women who have never been raped have symptoms of rape trauma. They are hypervigilant to certain cues, avoid situations that they sense are high risk, go numb in response to overtures from men that might be friendly, but that might also be the first step toward their violation. And this because most women in North America today know that they may be raped at any time and by anyone. All of us, writes Laura Brown, know someone like ourselves who was raped, more often than not in her own home, by a man she knew. If the question of consent has been at the forefront of discussions about sexual violence during the last few years, and especially since Raped Never Reported and Me Too, we tend to forget its etymology, a meaning philosopher Giorgio Agamben recalls in his essay about friendship. From the Latin con and sentire, to consent means to feel with, to feel together. When being sexually violent, men show an inability or a refusal to feel with their partner. Consent is not an issue. On the other hand, women, through the sharing of testimonies about sexual violence, make consent central. Whether we know each other or not, we feel together. We share the pain, and we share, of course, the anger. This anger that Leslie Jameson describes rediscovering in January 2018, realizing that for years she has replaced anger with sadness, confused anger for sadness, abiding by the stereotypes forced onto women. It is better to be a beautiful, gentle, sad woman than a mad harpy. Sadness is more refined and more selfless, as if you were holding the pain inside yourself, writes Jameson, rather than making someone else deal with its blunt force trauma. Women are congratulated when they hold their anger back, like Uma Thurman on a red carpet a year ago, right in the midst of MeToo, refusing to comment on Harvey Weinstein at that precise moment because, she said, she wanted to wait until she felt less angry. She expressed cold rather than burning rage, and it became viral. Presented this way, as what cannot be expressed until it has cooled down, female anger is acceptable, which speaks to expectations concerning female anger, expectations that were put into question during and since MeToo. As Jameson writes, anger is about necessity, what needs to burn in our voices, glowing and fearsome, fully aware of its own heat. Throughout Big Little Lies, we see Jane, the single mother who was raped by an unknown man, go running on the beach, coming home out of breath, loud music playing in her ears, dancing or fidgeting away the screams that she most often keeps in check. One day, she admits to Madeline that she owns a gun, that she goes to target practice once a month. Madeline's negative reaction brings her to describe to Madeline what it feels like to hold it in her hand, how it inhibits mentalization and helps her block herself off from emotions and painful memories. She says she feels stronger with one, more empowered, less of a hostage to what was done to her. Throughout the series, and we don't know if this is a memory or a fantasy, we repeatedly see Jane on the beach in a blue dress after being assaulted, running after her anonymous rapist, holding a gun in her hand, pointing it at him, this man whose face she cannot see. Until the very end of the series, when, after recognizing her rapist as Celeste's husband, Perry, she sees herself pointing the gun at him as he turns around towards her, a scene similar to the one I described from Thelma and Louise. Now that she sees his face, now that she can look him in the eye, she brings the gun down. She does not shoot. She does not have to shoot now that he has appeared, that she has recognized him. The lack of power had not only to do with the actual act of violence, but with the fact that he had been able to hide, that he was anonymous, and that therefore he could come back anytime to haunt her or to rape her again in reality. She was disempowered, as we all are, in the face of all men. This culture that fabricates toxic men, men whose faces are erased in the way we speak about sexual violence and violence against women. No, women are not raped or beaten. Men rape and beat and kill women. A fact that must be stated in its active form rather than by using a passive voice, as Jackson Katz points out, in order to place the focus not on the victim of the act, but on its perpetrators. Those who enact what Stephen March calls the often ugly and dangerous nature of the male libido. In Big Little Lies, Bonnie, played by Zoe Kravitz, the only main character who is black, as I've said earlier, runs down the alley leading to the group formed by all of the other women, trying to tear Perry away from Celeste. She runs towards them, screaming in rage, and pushes Perry off the edge of the stairs. What she pushes down is not only a violent husband, but masculinity, and I would say whiteness, masculine whiteness, as the all in all men. Whiteness and masculinity as invisibility, what Ross Chambers calls the unexamined. Whiteness and masculinity atomized into invisibility through the individualization of masculine and white subjects. Indivisibilized, as writes Chambers, by erasing context, producing masculine whiteness as the familiar fabric of the everyday, in contrast with the exoticization of the examinable pluralized, other, female or black. It is the innocence that constitutes the crime, wrote James Baldwin, and so it is here. The lesson in Big Little Lies has to do with female friendship and solidarity standing against the unexamined and innocent all men. When worse comes to worse, the exoticized Bonnie, the calm and generous yoga teacher, partner to Madeleine's ex-husband and resented by her, once again overcomes differences, forgets about what divides them to act in solidarity. While this representation of a black woman remains stereotypical, not only as magical Negro, as Spike Lee would say, but as an angry black woman, even if it is for a brief moment, Bonnie expels toxic masculinity as what stands between women, between all women, between black and white women. She points out that white masculinity is toxic not only because of the way it acts on women's bodies, but because of the system it works to produce, where white and black women are set up one against the other, where white women participate in the unexamination of whiteness. In the very white bourgeois world of Monterey, Bonnie is a wake-up call. The only way to end the abuse of women by men is to bring down the power of all white men. The only way to tackle the abuse is to start examining those who have for so long remained unexamined. And in order to bring down all men, women have to do it together, while at the same time facing the differences between them. Which implies that white women recognize how they have too often played along in a system that has used their so-imagined pure whiteness as a tool in racism. Which implies that white women recognize what black women, such as Tarana Burke, who created a foundation called MeToo 10 years ago, have done for girls and women victims of sexual violence. In October 2018, I wondered what men, in October a year ago, I wondered what men were doing faced with the flood of testimonies from women known and unknown to them. If they scrolled down the pages, glancing over the Twitter or Facebook posts, or if they took the time to read every sentence, every word. And if they were indeed reading, I wondered, as one does a novel, who were they identifying with? Where were they placing themselves in regard to the scene described? Were they actor or spectator? Were they able to take pause and look back at their own life, scrolling down memory lane to find those moments when they put themselves first, using women as means to get to the end of their own desire? Were they able to step on their pride and really question themselves? Choosing to write my book with Thelma and Louise, these fictional friends, was a way to refuse him access to literature. It was about me refusing to bring him into literature, making him into a novel, or making a novel out of this story as if he deserved to be given the face of literature, as if he deserved to be read. Instead, literature became a way to deface him, peel away his individual face, his specificity, what we call an identity, and reveal him as just another man, as part of all men. And in doing this, keeping the secret of sexual violence within my book, in refusing to give him language, hear his voice in a dialogue, or paint his body and his actions with my words, I was stating that I was the one who needed to be read. My life, my book, not his. Patriarchy kills off stories and women to maintain its power, writes Rebecca Solnit. I want words instead of guns. And most importantly, I want silence and words, secrets and stories, shared angrily and proudly and strongly between women. Through Me Too, women became writers. The demand that comes with this is for men to finally become readers. Sure, I am not allowed to move. I would be tempted to move around, but I'm not allowed.
Questions, comments? We have a microphone that we can bring so that everybody can hear.
I know it's a difficult topic. I really wish we can discuss this, even though it's, and my conference is a bit of a provocation as well. I know that. How would I what? I didn't. A silencer.
The piece of the gun that silences the sound that it makes when it's aimed at something.
I think that's what I do. I think it's what I was trying to describe. I think the silencer is. I'll be anecdotal. When I was working on the manuscript, there are all these stages, and we're coming close to the end. And my editor, at some point, says, "This is all fine. It's working well, but you need to say a bit more about those scenes of sexual violence," which there weren't any, really. I was it was clear that something had happened, but I was refusing to say anything. So she wanted me to go there a bit more, and it was very difficult to do. And I think it is exactly that. I was using a silencer, and it ends up as the sentences are it's like lace. Like I worked at them very specifically, and I think it was in the use of like getting rid of the subject of the sentence, using affirmative or my God, I'm losing words in English. When let's say a sentence would be being in pain, lying on the floor. Like sentences written like that, in a kind of telegraphic way. So there is a silencer in the way I wrote these scenes specifically. Yes, it's a very good way to put it. I had never seen that like that.
I'm curious, in your writing, you call it autobiographical fiction, yes?
You could, yes.
Well, I forget who the writer was who said, write what you know, so.
Yeah. In French, we use auto-fiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you find that your initial inspiration, because you've cited now a television program and a movie, do you find that gives you your idea, or do you have the ideas before and then choose a medium that your readers will know?
I'm not sure it's that clear when it happens. Every book I write, even though they're all about an aspect of my life, whether losing a lover or telling the story of a friendship, every one of them is different. The only thing that is similar from one book to the other is that I write in fragments. I write pieces, and I work as a kind of, it's like a cutting board. It's like making a movie. I cut and paste until I find the right equilibrium. The Thelma and Louise book is out of character. It happened, and I can't quite understand how it did, but I was trying to write about this question of sexual violence, and I tried in a number of ways. I have all these documents that exist in my computer where I was telling the story to a friend, or I was giving him the voice. I was making him talk and him tell the story, and all of these documents, nothing worked. I couldn't find it. And I remember coming back from a long walk on a mountain in Montreal and just turning Thelma and Louise on my computer, which I had seen already 20 times. And I started transcribing it. And in transcribing it, that gesture told me that's where I have to go. I have to use them. I need them. I can't do this alone. So that's how I kind of worked the book. And the book is not only about neither me or Thelma and Louise. There are tens of women that are called into this book, because I reflect on Jane Campion's The Piano, or Extremities with Farrah Fawcett. I talk about Anita Hill. I go through all these women that are figures of feminist resistance, one way or another. So it's a whole community of women that I end up building in this book in order to be able to speak about myself. We tend to say that women's writing, at least that is something we hear in French, I don't know if it's the same thing in Anglophone literature, but that women's writing is narcissistic. That's something they often say, of course. But what's interesting is that often it's the opposite. You use yourself to actually go towards other women. You do universalize your own case, and that's what I tried to do in that book. So Thelma and Louise was a pretext, let's say.
Hi. I wondered if your use of the word or phrase autopsy was a play on words or a truth, because the way I interpreted was this idea of women's stories, when we tell our stories, we're not heard, and in a lot of academic spaces, our stories are often commodified and then not intellectualized and not seen fit for analysis of whatever concept we're looking at. So yeah.
I think, I'm not sure I gave it a lot of thought. It's an expression I use in French when I speak about my writing, because what interests me is detail. I think that's why this idea of the male glance is so appealing to me. I'm interested in details. It's not as apparent in the conference I gave today, but when I analyze works with my students, for instance, I like to pinpoint a detail and to kind of grab it and make the whole thing unravel. Okay, a detail in a movie, for instance. I don't know if you've all seen the second Blade Runner, 2049. It was made by a Québécois filmmaker, Denis Villeneuve. When I saw that movie, of course, it was a big thing in Quebec that he would be doing this remake of Blade Runner, and I have seen an innumerable amount of movies in my life. I can watch pretty much anything. And there's a scene in this movie where a woman, of course, people are going to say it's a robot or an android or whatever she was, is being strangled underwater. And that scene lasts forever. And I turned away from the screen, and this was one of the first showing in a big theater in Montreal, and I caught myself, and I thought, how is it that I can't watch this scene? I've seen murders of women on screen, like, how many times? And from that scene, I sort of reread Villeneuve's movie and realized how commodified women were. They're everywhere as commodification, as objects in this movie, and I was furious, of course, realizing this, and I wrote about it, and then of course was slammed because you cannot say anything bad about a Denis Villeneuve movie in Quebec. But what I was in, and I'm always very gentle about it, but anyway, it never really works out. I don't get, not everybody agrees with me, but what is interesting is that if you do grab onto a detail, then you can sort of make something unravel. I think that's what I do with my life. I think the autopsy has to do with that, how you can open up one's life and then look at the detail of what happens and what does the detail say about the politics around that life. I hope I'm clear. It's more difficult in English.
Hi, Martine.
Hi.
I'm in the act of doing what you're doing as far as applying my personal experiences and writing about them through the lens of fiction. And there's a part of me that feels very passionate about sharing my story and about connecting with others, as you talked about. And there's also a part of me that's hella afraid.
Yeah, of course.
Of sharing my stories, both from the perspective of what is my neighbor going to think, what is my mother
going
to
think,
of
course.
To also public reception. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how to shut off that voice of fear and keep going with the voice that says you need to do this.
You just shut it off. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how. I think at some point, I always say to my students, I always lose something when I publish a book. I always lose something. I can't tell beforehand what it will be, but there will be something. Someone will be hurt, someone will be angry, I will have to pay the price. That's just, when you speak about yourself and you bring other people into your books, usually that's what happens. You will, I mean, there will be an impact. But when I'm writing, if I worry about that, there is no writing going on, that's for sure. How do you shut it off? You have to stay connected to the urgency of what you're writing about. I think that's it. If I stay connected to that feeling that I have to do this, no matter what, then I forget. Afterwards, reality catches back, and then I deal with whatever happens. But in the process of writing, that's not possible. That's too hard. But I completely understand.
Thank you.
This isn't about the book, but more about the nature of what I've heard in the room tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, I forget your name. The introduction, you talked about the humanities helping to create a better world and teach us how to be empathetic and how to improve. And I'm kind of contrasting that with a lot of what I heard in your discussion there, and especially the phrase about the ugly and dangerous nature of the male libido.
Which was a quote, yes.
Yeah, that phrase stuck with me. And I wondered what your thoughts are about how we in our world today turn it around so that men are instilled with empathy instead of that ugly and dangerous nature. And how do you address it, or what kind of baby steps even can we take towards changing that?
I think the baby steps have to do with what we do in our own lives with the people we live with. I mean, those are the baby steps, right? To actually be able to speak. I mean, if there's something positive about what's going on, even though it's extremely difficult, and I realize, I know that what I read tonight is difficult. It's difficult to hear, and I wrote it in, as I said, as a provocation. Sometimes you have to use bigger words, bigger sentences, something heavier to get the message across, which doesn't mean that in my personal life, I am like that. Like, I don't necessarily act with that kind of intensity. But I think if we want things to change, it has to start at that micro level with how our partners, our friends, our fathers, our whoever, the men around us, deal with us and how we deal with them. And it is extremely difficult. I think when MeToo happened a year ago, a lot of families, couples, classrooms were perturbed because the ground was shaking under us. And how could we even speak to each other? I couldn't speak to my partner. It was very difficult. I said to him, I can't speak to you right now. And it lasted for a few days. It was too difficult. And how do you keep communication going when you have experiences of the world that are so radically different? And even though not all men are sexual abusers, they're not. But we live as women in a society where every woman around me has been sexually abused one way or another. So that is my life. It has nothing to do with his life. He's not surrounded with abusers, not necessarily, but he may be surrounded with a lot of men who have committed actions that have caused pain to women without them even knowing. And now what we're asking is reflect on it. Think back on it. You did not necessarily rape someone, not in the way that we want to understand what rape is, but you most probably did something at some point in your life that did something bad to her. You insisted, you played a guilt trip, you were too quick, whatever. Just think about it. I think that's the small step. And then the bigger step is keeping that conversation going. We need to keep talking about it. And we need to accept, I think, that it is going to be uncomfortable for a little while now. It's not going to be all roses and pleasant. I don't think it can be. Not if we want this to change for real. I mean, it's too bad, but it is uncomfortable.
In that regard, I wonder, it's one thing to ask a man to hear you, but when he shuts his doors, or when we see
in our country, these politicians that are serving Trump,
Mm-hmm.
and the right wing and the alt-right, beyond just the inability to read the feminine, it's the actual blatant hate of
Absolutely,
the feminine.
yeah.
And that's what scares me, and where my anger actually becomes sadness and I freeze.
Yeah.
So I wonder about, beyond telling stories and asking to be heard, when these things are going into law,
Mm-hmm.
and we have men like Kavanaugh become court justice. It's terrifying.
It is, definitely is. And there again, I'm like you. I mean, I'm hearing you speak, and I also get choked up. It's, sometimes I think it may be a bit rosy-eyed on my part, or naive, or whatever, but it's another baby step to take that expression. I think we need to love women more. Mm-hmm. So if men keep doing what they're doing, if men don't want to hear it, if men want to keep hating women, and I'm making this in like really broad strokes, at the least we can do is love women. Because what happens in this system, and that is another topic that I'm interested in, is I mentioned quickly and a bit with humor the cat fights, but patriarchy, if we want to use that word, of masculine domination, one of its tools is to set women one against the other. There is nothing for us to be connected. It looks like it because we have Sex and the City or the L Word or whatever images of women, having fun together, the book club or whatever. But are we really being told that we have to love each other? I don't think so. So if I personally, I'm just throwing it back to me, I have a 15-year-old daughter. I love my daughter, but I love the girls that she's with. I want to be interested in her, in that adolescence. I want to bring them up. I want to show them that their interests are important, because we downplay, we mock teenage girls, what they love, the music they listen to, the way they dress, they're hypersexualized, and everything. We hear everything about them, but never how amazing they are, how creative they are, how smart they are. We start undoing them from such an early age. So the first step is to not undo them, to actually put them together and to really love each other. And I think that is the most difficult thing for us, to actually not fear losing a place that we think we might be losing if we love the other woman rather than love the guy. And that has nothing to do with sex. Just if he has power, I should be going towards the power, right? But maybe it's better for us to not go towards the power and to just stay together. I think that's the only possibility.
You have a brilliant voice and insight, and we thank you. And in view of recent occurrence that we all saw, how do you describe Dr. Ford and Kavanaugh?
How do I describe them?
How do you describe what happened?
Well, I think you can imagine what my position on this is. But we were talking about in a classroom this afternoon what is, of course, and what has been pointed out and written about in all the newspapers, and how she contained herself and how he was a bully. And that's pretty much what my conference was about. The women contain themselves, we live daily, and we go through our lives with these experiences of sexual violence, and we still have partners, have families, have a job. We live, and we care. We take care of other people. And I think that's what we saw, that she didn't want to go there. She was brought there against pretty much her will. She went with it. She said, it's my civic duty. She contained her tears, and he threw a tantrum. Whether he was told to do so or not, I really don't care. It just says something about the positions, the roles that are given to women and to men. And I don't think she could, I don't wish that she would have been a really angry woman on that stand. I believe that she chose the right way to do things. What I find despicable is what he did and how that worked. And that makes me very sad. But there again, we have to bring up our kids differently. We have to give a voice to our students in our classrooms, to make the female students speak more. We have to do these little things that put women up, that bring them up, and tell them that we want to hear them, and that if they cry or scream, if they're angry or happy or whatever they are, that is what we want to hear.
So sexual violence is to stop that. It's to stop from bringing women up. Being the bottom line on it, don't you think?
Can you repeat that?
Sexual violence of
Yeah.
men to women
Yeah.
is a way of keeping us
from going up?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, is it consciously a Machiavellic way of doing it? No, I don't. I mean, maybe yes in some cases, but not. But it's a cultural way, definitely, definitely. How many lives are ruined? How many? I've been fighting for what is Title IX here, the equivalent in my university. And we were fighting to get our university, and this is over the last few years, to recognize that it is very problematic when male professors, because that is the greater number of, I mean, it rarely happens in the other way around, male professors have romantic sexual relationships with female students. How many of these female students have had their lives ruined? They have left university campuses, they have not finished their degrees, they end up living with less money, they sometimes have children out of these relationships, and they care for them alone. I mean, this is one example, but of course it's a way to keep women down. Because we survive, but it doesn't mean we forget, it doesn't mean we heal, it means we sacrifice. We are sacrificed by this system.
Right. I didn't raise my daughters as well as I could have if I hadn't been raised. I know that.
Well, I mean, that is one cost. Yeah, definitely. Our relationships, women to women, are tainted by that experience of sexual violence. That's why I say it's not just about women being in competition, right? Which is the cliche that we say about women, that women always are their worst enemies. But why? Why is it like that? If not because there is always that menace of sexual violence, and the opposite would be the hope of being elected as the one who will not be sexually abused, or the one who will be respected, or the one who will be put on a pedestal, right? They kind of go together. I mean, being raped or sexually abused is like a negative election.
We have our last question right here.
It wasn't a question, it was more as a thank you. I really appreciate your talk. Coming as a man, it's very self-reflecting, talking about things like this. And I think what you said earlier about women having to speak up is a very important thing. It not only forces men to look at themselves, but to actually talk about a subject that is pushed underneath the rug, which shouldn't be. My girlfriend, when she was younger, was abused, and it messes with her to this day. And
of course.
She's just one of the millions of women that have had to deal with the male genitalia that just thinks they can do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
It flows into our government, and it flows into the schools and into everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it just shouldn't be that way. Men should think about things. The white male, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
You touched on many important things, and it is important, and men should think it's important, and I think women should just speak up more. And do not let men speak over you, because that's the only way that women can be where they should belong.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much.